Hi, I'm Ria.
And I'm Alex.
In this podcast, we will cover coping mechanisms. So, do you feel like you lose control of yourself when you get emotional? Do you make bad decisions when you're scared or angry? Most people do, and there's a good reason for that. The rational part of our brain shuts down when it perceives a threat. It doesn't want complex things getting in the way of survival. Our ancestors needed this response for things like running away from a tiger or needing something to eat, so they did not stop.
Today we experience all the same emotions when things get intense, but the circumstances are quite different. Our brain may go into survival mode when getting feedback from our boss at work, or when talking in front of a big group of people. We may shut down when getting a bad grade from a school assignment, or when getting rejected from a crush. In these circumstances, allowing the brain into that survival mode is not always the best strategy. Sometimes we need to slow things down and think clearly, so that we can make better choices that will help us move through these uncomfortable situations rather than just reacting to them. Our brains and emotions are incredible things, but still, sometimes our emotions don't have our best interests at heart. So being able to regulate them is important. And that is what coping mechanisms are all about.
So, what are coping mechanisms? Coping mechanisms are strategies people use consciously or unconsciously to try and help you tolerate, minimize, and deal with stressful situations. The idea is that our environment can always cause us some stress, and our bodies are evolved to try and find solutions to these stress. It does this by either down-regulating or up-regulating. All that means is that you might up-regulate and move into a much more active and vibrant state by taking a stimulant or attention seek. Or maybe you might down-regulate by endlessly scrolling through social media or smoking marijuana to calm yourself down. Whatever the case, these are all types of coping mechanisms.
But not all these coping skills are created equally. Sometimes it's tempting to engage in strategies that will give you quick relief, but might create bigger problems for you down the road. Some of the most common unhealthy coping mechanisms are things like avoiding issues. When you avoid something negative, you might stop your negative emotions for a while, but when you push back a problem, they always tend to resurface again later. Sleeping too much is another avoidance technique that might temporarily make you feel better. When you have depression or anxiety, you get tired and fatigued quicker, so getting enough sleep is really important. I'll talk about this more in a later podcast. But using sleep to avoid your problems isn't always helpful. Learning when to give yourself rest and when to confront your issues is difficult, and this is something that you could get help with from a mental health professional.
Another is substance use. Drugs, alcohol and tobaccos can be a slippery slope. Stimulants and depressants may numb you, thus avoiding negative thoughts. But as you know, excessive use can lead to severe mental health complications, addiction, overdose, and even death.
Over or under eating is another common one. Your body needs nutrition and fuel to function throughout the day, but anything over or under the recommended guidance can cause health issues or sickness. We talk more in depth about this in the Exercise and Nutrition podcast later on.
Another is negative self-talking or criticizing yourself, as it is often the most prominent one people associate with depression. When something goes wrong, we often look for something to blame. Unfortunately, we often place this blame in the wrong place. Blaming ourselves unnecessarily is easy, but it doesn't help much. Or you could do the exact opposite and place the blame solely on external factors like your family, friends, or colleagues, causing arguments.
The final one is self-harming, or the act of intentionally causing yourself physical damage. 1 in 14 people use self-harm to try and cope with their emotions in the UK. Self-Harm UK, Mind and the NHS's services provide a lot of support on this topic if you want more information. There are so many different coping mechanisms people use. I've known friends who use humour and compulsive risk-taking to deal with their emotions. I know individuals who react to negative emotions by focusing on solving other people's problems or becoming more caring and protecting over them. For me, it was things like biting my fingernails, leg shaking, which is a very common motor tip. and actively believing the lies that I would tell myself in order to avoid what I would perceive as potential problems or stuff that would make me feel better about myself. My point is that by the time that people have trouble with their depression and anxiety, they've probably developed some harmful coping mechanisms. You might not be proud of them, but the important thing is that you recognise them. Once you see them for what they really are, you have a much better chance of developing a healthier, longer term solution to coping with the same emotions.
So, it can be a difficult process. A lot of the time, these things become a habit or a ritual. When you have depression and anxiety, your mind clings very tightly to those habits you have reinforced in your brain. So tightly that it becomes an unconscious default reaction to anything negative we experience. Even if these coping mechanisms are detrimental to you, your brain has become addicted to the discomfort or relief they provide in the short term. This addiction is why it's so difficult to change it, but it can be done.
These unhealthy coping mechanisms often help you get by or even survive at one time, but still eventually they inevitably become inappropriate or damaging to your life. Imagine yourself standing in the rain on the banks of a raging river. Suddenly, the water-swollen banks give way. You fall in and find yourself being tossed around in the rapids. Your efforts to keep afloat are futile, and you are drowning. By chance, a huge log comes, and you grab onto it and hold tight. The log keeps your head above the water and saves your life. While clinging onto the log, you are swept downstream and eventually come to a place where the water is calm. In the distance, you see the riverbank and attempt to swim to shore, but you cannot because you are still clinging onto the log with one arm as you try and swim with the other. How ironic. The very thing that saved your life is now getting in the way of where you want to go. There are people on the shore who see you struggle and yell, "Let go of the log!" But you just can't seem to let go. And so, very slowly and carefully, you let go of the log and practice floating. When you start to sink, you grab back on. Then you let go of the log and practice treading water. And when you get tired, hold on once again. After a while, you practice swimming around the log once, twice, 10 times, 20 times, or 100 times, until you gain the strength and confidence you need to swim to shore. Only then do you completely let go of the log. Think about what that log represents to you. Take this chance to be introspective. When have things gone wrong in your life? What was your response? What things did you reach for? And do you think that in hindsight that was the right thing to do? If it was, then great, keep that up. But if not, then don't worry. With some work, you can change them. That's where psychological interventions and lifestyle changes hugely impact individuals who want to change or develop new coping mechanisms. They introduce a plan to let go of that metaphorical log and provide hope that a world without relying on that log is possible. A psychologist will usually recommend various healthy coping mechanisms that they believe would work well for you. There are many to try, so if you think one isn't working for you, that's okay. What's important is to honestly give them a shot at helping you. These healthy coping mechanisms work most effectively when you have a psychological thought exercise to manage your emotions and behavioural tactics that encourages those positive thoughts and promotes a healthy lifestyle. This sounds way more complicated than it actually is. For mild to moderate depression and anxiety, it is often about keeping it simple, stripping it back to working on self-care routines, and then delving deeper into more specific coping mechanisms with a healthcare professional. In 2014, Mark Way created a list of the most effective self-care activities he encountered over his 15-year career as a clinical psychologist. Please bear with me while I go through them. It could be helpful to think if any would actually benefit you, or just importantly, if you think that they aren't right for you. He broke them down into 7 categories, the first of which is sensory coping skills. These are helpful as they incorporate various parts of the brain and body. They can soothe the core brain, that limbic part of your brain where your emotional response is created. And they include getting a breath of fresh air, snuggling under a cosy blanket, listening to running water, sitting outdoors by a fire pit, taking a hot shower or a warm bath, feeling something textured. For children, this is often something like a blanket, getting a massage, cuddling with a pet, paying attention to your breathing, smelling something nice, exercise, and listening to music.
The second category was pleasure, taking yourself out to eat, being a tourist in your city, gardening, watching a movie, making art or doing a craft project, journaling, walking your dog, or going to a shelter to walk dogs without a family. Going for a photo walk, which means taking photos on your walk.
The third category was mental mastery. This included cleaning out a junk drawer or closet, taking action on something that you've been avoiding, trying a new activity, driving to a new place, making a list of your thoughts, trying a crossword puzzle or doing a word search, and finally reading something on a topic that you usually wouldn't.
The fourth category was spiritual activities. These were things like attending church, reading poetry, or inspiring quotes, lighting a candle, meditating, spending time in nature, praying, or list 5 things you're grateful for.
The fifth is cognitive activities, which include accepting or acknowledging your feelings for what they are, writing your feelings down. This could be in the form of journaling or brain dumping, crying when you need to, allowing yourself to smile or to laugh, practicing self-compassion, guiding imagery, and progressive muscle relaxation.
The penultimate category was physical activities. These were trying yoga, going for a walk or a run, participating in martial art classes, dancing, ensuring that you get enough sleep, or taking a short 30-minute nap.
The final of these self-care activities were the social ones. For example, having a conversation with somebody, calling up a friend, participating in a book club, joining a support group, and taking up a team sport. We aren't telling you about this list of activities to challenge you on how many you can do. It's essential that you try and be realistic with yourself. It's hard for someone with anxiety and depression to do most of these things. The list's purpose is to encourage you to start thinking about what things you want to do, and then when you're ready, start taking the first steps to do them. The aim is not to do these things amazingly, like become a professional dancer or be able to meditate perfectly for hours on end, but rather to try and enjoy the action itself. Just dancing in your kitchen to your favourite song or trying a 5-minute guided meditation would be amazing. An interesting study by Gorova showed that individuals with depression who regularly integrated 3 or more of these positive self-care activities just once a week saw an increase in their mental health comparable to taking medication. This clinical evidence shows us just how important these activities can be for our well-being. The study also pointed to sleep management and health consciousness being the second and third biggest contributing factors to effective self-development for depression. These are both things that we'll cover in later podcasts.
While you can do a lot to help yourself, sometimes getting help is important. Getting a different perspective, especially from a professional, can significantly impact how effective self-care plans are. A professional can also help work through the difficult thoughts that might prevent someone from helping themselves. A healthcare professional can also delve deeper into those psychological tools that have become crucial for directly managing those emotions. The psychological skills you will learn are often taught in therapy sessions or are set as homework for you to try between sessions.
Suppose you feel like you're in crisis. If you feel like you're going to make bad choices, you're afraid that you might self-harm, or you're so emotional that you can't think clearly, then halt. HALT. This is an acronym often used by therapists to help you remember that if you are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, if you've had any substances, or if you're severely depressed or anxious, then halt. Pause and slow yourself down. Work through these coping mechanisms and reach out for some resources that might help you.
So, in the rest of this podcast, we will work through ways of making it easier to take that initial halt and slow things down. I'm going to introduce some ways a therapist may help you manage your emotions, chat about the advice a therapist could give you about these coping mechanisms, as well as develop a bit of a crisis plan for the people you can connect with in case something happens or comes up that feels a little bit too big to handle in the moment.
So let's start with making it easier to slow things down. Anxiety and depression aren't just in your mind, they often take up physical manifestations in your body. Because of this, we can develop some strategies to use our bodies to soothe our minds. There are many different strategies, but I will cover 4 of the most common effective ways to calm yourself down. These 4 are deep breathing and vagal tone, peripheral vision and softening of the eyes, the Valsalva maneuver, and exercise.
We will go through these in a minute, but let's talk about a bit of biology for context. So, our bodies have an automatic nervous system, a fancy part of our body that automatically regulates breathing rate, heart rate, blood pressure, and a whole bunch of other stuff. When we experience a stressful situation, the nervous system kicks on the fight, flight, freeze response, also known as the sympathetic response. This automatic response increases blood pressure, heart rate, your hands start to sweat, or your stomach clenches up, and these are all physical manifestations of anxiety. However, our beautiful wise bodies have created a counterbalance called the parasympathetic response. Para as in parachute, because it brings us back down to slow. So these techniques aim to try and get this parasympathetic response going. The first technique is the vagal tone and deep breathing. Vagal tone is the way of measuring how quickly you can trigger this sympathetic response. Just like the muscle tone in your arm indicates how much you exercise it, your vagal tone shows you how much you exercise this parasympathetic response and how strong it is. To start, we would test your heart rate variability. Find your pulse on your wrist or neck. Close your eyes and focus. Now breathe in and breathe out slowly. You can pause the podcast here if you'd like to try this. See if you can notice anything about your heart rate. When you breathe in, your heart rate increases. When you breathe out slowly, your heart rate decreases. If you have a strong vagal tone, your heart rate will decrease more as you breathe out than if you have a quick vagal tone. And just like exercising a muscle, you can exercise and improve this vagal tone. Just deep breathing. This means you can trigger that calming down response sooner the more you do it. Lower vagal tone is strongly associated with depression, anxiety, mood instability, PTSD, chronic fatigue, and inflammation. This is why you have probably heard deep breathing, especially deep, long out breaths, recommended for anxiety. But now you know why.
Peripheral vision and softening the eyes sounds like a pretty weird thing to be talking about when discussing things to calm you down. It's one of those things that scientifically works well, but many people struggle to actually implement it. But if you manage to, it could be a very effective way in calming yourself down. You may have heard of the term tunnel vision, right? That's when your vision seems to get narrow when you're stressed or angry. This is your brain triggering that sympathetic response because it has evolved from millions of years ago that when you're stressed out, you should focus on one thing, like running away from a tiger. We needed that tunnel vision to not get distracted. In today's world, it rarely has any practical applications. Still, it gives us another way of setting off that parasympathetic response, which calms us down. You'd start to do this by softening the muscles around your eyes. You can do this by squeezing them shut, then opening them up slowly while touching the side of your eyes. When your eyes open, try to expand your awareness of your vision while keeping your eyeballs looking straight ahead. focusing on one thing in front of you while noticing what's off in the corners of your vision. Hopefully this will trigger that calming parasympathetic response we are after.
The third way to reduce anxiety and help to halt is to increase the pressure in your chest cavity. This is called the Valsalva maneuver or bearing down. I think the easiest way to explain it is the feeling that you get when you hold your nose, close your mouth and tense up if you're going to hold a sneeze. When you do this, the vagus nerve actually into contact with your pelvic floor. This is a one that you might have to search up on YouTube or Google to demonstrate better. But let's try this and put it into practice. So, try breathing in for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then bear down for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't need to do it hard, just enough to create some pressure in your chest. Then finally, breathe out for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You would do this 2 or 3 times in a row, breathing regularly in between so you don't get lightheaded. This would trigger that vagus nerve and help to calm you down.
Finally, the fourth way to trigger that parasympathetic response and calm down is to exercise. This is my go-to way of calming myself. I find it challenging to perform any other techniques while I'm in a state of anxiety, but I find that exercising combines breathing and eye relaxation without me even thinking about it. Intense exercise stimulates our sympathetic response, meaning it doesn't calm you down. So you want to do light cardiovascular exercises. This is why walking is so heavily advised. Walking reduces muscle tightness and digestive issues, gets more oxygen into our system and reduces blood pressure, while also helping to regulate your breathing and, depending on where you're walking, encourages you to use your peripheral vision, all of which helps to calm you down. We'll go through all the other effects of exercise in a different podcast.
These are just a few of the ways that have been shown to help us calm down. In reality, there are loads of different things that you could try. But try to be patient with yourself. Eventually you'll find your own techniques that work for you. Sometimes it can be as easy as going to sleep. Whatever it is, it will hopefully put you in a better mental state when you are more likely to address the problem successfully. Some of the techniques that a therapist could go through with you are challenging negative thoughts or cognitive restructuring, centering, self-compassion, mindfulness, journaling, emotional regulation, and self-regulation. Most therapists will introduce these coping mechanisms to you, but they often only mask the symptoms for the short term. So your therapist can provide you with longer term techniques that get to the root cause of your anxiety or depression. This is because a therapist wants to help you as best as possible in those difficult moments, but also they don't want you to become dependent on these coping mechanisms for the rest of your life. The aim is that these coping mechanisms can keep you in that feel-good zone, but once they have soothed you or soothed that anxiety and depression, you can return to the root cause of the problem and find ways to reduce its impact on you.
If the coping mechanisms you're using don't seem to be helping you, it's important to have a plan of what you can do to help yourself. Within the healthcare industry, we call this a crisis plan. It starts at basic level, identifying that you are feeling anxious or depressed, and then progress into things like these coping mechanisms they've identified to help you and that have worked out which strategies work best for you in different environments such as school, work or home. Finally, think of people you can contact within this crisis. If you're having a crisis, would you know who to contact? If you do, then great, but if not, then it is recommended that you do this research before you get to that crisis point.
Some great points of contacts if you are the Samaritans, the National Suicide Prevention Helpline, the Campaign Against Living Miserably, or if you don't want to talk to somebody directly, the Shout is an excellent texting service providing mental health support. 111 and 999 are, of course, always available to you in times of crisis. Often with 111, they can put you through to a mental health crisis team who are well trained to offer you support. If you feel like your own or someone else's life is at risk because they have been seriously injured themselves or taken an overdose, or you believe that there is a risk of immediate harm, then call 999. I hope that you have learnt a little about coping mechanisms and that you can take something away from this episode. We are all different, so different things work for each of us. Coping mechanisms are about getting to know yourself more honestly and working with your body to control your mind.
Thank you again for your attention and time. See you again in the next podcast.